Hi, my name is Danelle Scarborough. I go by she and her, and it's an honor to be your facilitator for tonight's community conversation. We're going to provide input, ask your input on the next chief for the city of San Diego. We're going to start with some welcoming and opening comments by our Chief Executive Officer, Scott Chadwick, and it's my pleasure to introduce him now. Scott?
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. Wow, you got some great speakers. So first, what a fantastic crowd. This is absolutely outstanding. We did this 2 nights ago. This is going to be our third of 6 community forums. And again, we just want to sincerely thank the center for being our host tonight. Again, you guys have just a fantastic venue. But what's so exciting about this is again, the third step, or at least the third forum that we're offering in helping us select our next police chief. And again, what a critically important time. And again, we can't thank all of you enough for being here. We really look forward to each and every one of your participations. We want to encourage discussion. The forums that you see, or at least the tables, it's critically important that we hear from you. We want to have a discussion. There are going to be 3 questions that we're going to be asking. 1, what characteristics do you want to see or would you like to see in your police chief? 2, the other question is what are the top 3 issues that are going to be facing the next police chief? And of course, last, is there anything else that we haven't covered? Again, we want to hear from you. We're going to take this information back. We will synthesize it, put it into a report, and then we'll be sharing that report. It will be available on the city's website. It'll be shared with City Council. And we're not done there, though. On the city's website, we also have a survey to solicit or further get a more transparent input from folks. So again, I encourage you, talk to your friends, ask them to go to the city's website at sandiego.gov /next police chief and help us with the information, because again, your opinions matter. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Danelle, and let's get this thing going.
Very
Danelle,
good.
thank you.
Thank you. I have one more introduction and welcome from the center, our host, Rebecca Hook-Held, and would like to welcome us to the center and give us a little bit of logistic orientation.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, Rebecca Hook-Held with the center. Welcome. Just want to take a moment to welcome you all here. For many of you, you're not the first time here at the center, but logistically, a pardon for our mess in the back. Saturday is AIDS Walk San Diego, the largest HIV fundraiser, and so we are prepared for that. So excuse our mess, but we're very excited to have you all here tonight and really worked well to make the space available for this great conversation to happen. Secondly, just some logisticals about the restrooms. All of our bathrooms here at the center are gender neutral. They're out this back door and to the left. There are some that are multi-stall and some that are single stall. So help yourselves to the facilities as needed. And thank you again so much. And if you have friends or family that are on their way and can't find parking in our lot, the DMV lot is open and free to park. So you can tweet or text them that that's a great place to park and walk the block and to have them come and join the conversation. So thank you again so much.
Thank you. All right, we are going to take a moment and look at the format that we're going to engage in this evening. I appreciate that you have joined tables because the focus of our conversation is going to be the community that you see at your table. Let me walk through the agenda. You have all 3 of these boards you have at your table, and we're going to look at the agenda first. We are going to start with the question about priorities. The first question is the top priorities our next police chief must address. The process will be the input form that you have at your table. The questions are all laid out there, and the first step is for you to think your own, what did you come here to say? What are the key things to you personally? And we'll ask you to make notes on that input sheet, And then we'll turn to the group at your table. When you see that most of the people at the table have finished their writing, if someone would lean in and start the conversation, the idea is that each of you share what your priorities are. What did you come to say? And then as a table, if you could listen to each other, begin to synthesize what do we have in common, what are the priorities that we see. We're going to ask that the group at the table create a chart paper. We're going to ask you to, this is the Apple pause. Got it. We're going to ask your group to make a chart. We're going to bring you chart paper, and you will make a list of the things that you've decided that your table feel like need to be said to the larger group. We'll ask a spokesperson from each table to come to the front of the room. We'll give you the microphone and let you tell us the issues that your table feels like are the top priorities for our next police chief. That'll be round one. Round two, we'll do the same thing with question number 2. What are the top characteristics or qualities of leadership that our next chief should have? And we'll do the same thing. You write your notes on input form, table conversation, chart paper, report out to the larger group so that we begin to hear. Sometimes when you ask for input, you just get a laundry list of ideas. And by having the community conversation first, there's some prioritization, some consensus, some collaboration. And so the issues that we see reported out here are the ones that have bubbled up to the top of your conversation. Our experience is that we don't always get to question number 3, so I would encourage you to take the time to write your answer on that input form, and that's the question about, is there anything else that the city of San Diego should know, should hear, should consider when selecting our next police chief? So those for sure, write on that input form, and there's a box as you leave that you can stick that input form in. To guide our conversation, I'm going to ask you to look at the back of your agenda. We're going to use guidelines that have been developed as a code of civil discourse. Our local organization that is doing such good work, the National Conflict Resolution Center, NCRC, has been using these guidelines, this code, in their community conversations, and we'd like to as well. We'll promote an inclusive environment where diverse perspectives are shared and considered. We'll listen attentively and ask questions to understand each other's priorities. We'll show respect for ideas and views presented, even where we disagree. We'll explain our positions by fairly presenting the reasons for them. And we'll avoid personal attacks or other tactics that distract attention from our central issues. And our central issues are, what do we want and expect from our next police chief? So a couple things before we jump in. If you're at this table, you're going to get the benefit of our council member, Chris Ward's opinion. So I wanted to acknowledge, thank you for being here. Yeah. And if you're at these tables, you get the benefit of each other and community members like yourself coming here on a Thursday evening when there's so many other competing priorities. So thank you for making this important. And I'd like you to focus on question number 1 and start with writing your own thoughts down, and then somebody take a leadership role and then start the conversation at your table. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We are going to shift to listening now to group reports. We would like one person from each of your table to bring your chart up. We're going to put it on this chart stand in the front of the room and then ask you to speak into the microphone and walk us through the items that you've put on your list. Is there a table willing to go first? All right.
On this side. Okay, thank you very much. We're the table over here, and we had a great discussion, and we really appreciate this opportunity and hope that there'll be continued transparency throughout this process. The priorities we had were on hiring practices and recruiting, recognizing that it's the selection of the officers which has a lot to do with what goes on in the police community. And then community policing, strengthening that and working towards even improving and making that better. Designing and implementing transparent policies. And amongst those policies, we called out non-discriminatory practices and the surveillance, not militarizing the police, and watching out for all the other things that are going on to ensure that as things move forward, that there's a community voice in that as well. We talked about training for de-escalation so that our citizens are protected and can feel safe around the police at all times, which is generally true, but unfortunately not always true. And fair and open reporting and communications, that the kind of report that came out from San Diego State University will continue, that the recommendations will be adopted, and there'll be discussions about that. And finally, treatment and policies towards the homeless, because we all know that the homeless is a real problem in our community, and that we really want to ensure that they are taken care of to the maximum extent that that can happen. Did I miss anything? Okay, thank you.
I'll take this. Great start. Thank you very much. It looks like you're volunteering to be the next person. I'm so sorry. Come on, right up here. Put it up high.
I'm short, so this is
Oh, true.
Hey everyone, my name is Will Rodriguez Kennedy. So my group had a really good conversation as well. What we did was we started with like a bunch of ideas, and then we listed them. But then we sort of created a theme. And one of the first things that we wanted to have mentioned is that we have concerns about the process and transparency. So what we would like to do is embrace something that has been pushed forward by some of the members of the council and sort of open up the process and have full transparency throughout the entire process, because we're concerned that a lot of this may not matter as much unless we had participation within that process. So that's the first thing that they wanted me to mention. In terms of priorities of what we're looking for, one of the things that we talked about is we would like to have a police department that has the training capacity and does the things to make sure that our officers have a greater value for human life, which goes into a series of things. Making sure that officers respect well, first of all, talking about de-escalation of force and making sure that our officers are not quick to use lethal options, but in addition to making sure that we treat people with basic dignity. So that goes into a host of things, from homelessness and making sure we treat homeless citizens or community members with dignity, also dealing with mental health, and also addressing the racial disparities that we have that we found out from the SDSU study. So we think that that's very important, which leads into a very important thing that we think is also going to be at the top of their list, which is the training, recruiting, and retention of officers. We understand that officers are underpaid and overworked, and we also know that that in the near future, that there's going to be a ton of officers who are cycling out, and then the sheriff's department is also doing the same, which means that we could lose a series of officers, which means a police force, which is already at a crisis level of manning, will actually lose officers in a critical point in their development. So we think that that's important, that we raise the benefits of the officers, make it more competitive, but also that we are recruiting the best talent possible. So that's the second thing. And then finally, we believe it's important to mention that we have a broad search, that we're inclusive in this search, that we have a broad search in terms of national searching, that we look at the full spectrum of candidates that we could have, but also that we look to our own department to see where there are people who are doing work. Thank you.
Love the volunteer spirit. Very good.
One of our points near the bottom as far as recruitment seems to play off of what the last member said, where if we look at more of our marginalized communities, we live in a minority-majority city. It would be really nice to see these minorities represented more in our police force, not necessarily in a forced way or a hiring way, but as far as where we are, where we're recruiting from, that we're going into these communities and we're actively trying to make sure that we're recruiting equally to begin with. Some of the things we also were discussing was making sure that when we see cases of domestic violence, that simple basic protocols like using gender appropriate terms, not coming into the situation with a bias. So more sensitivity training in general in regards to domestic violence cases. Domestic violence happens against men as well as women. Yesterday in the League of Women Voters, we were discussing how Southern California has the largest population of racist skinheads in the country. So really making sure that we're addressing white supremacy, we're calling it what it is, and we're facing it head on, that we're not letting it get away. Which also goes back to making sure we have a balanced police force. So that way it's, Black Lives Matter has its own say in the police force as well, would be nice. And we wanted to make sure that considering DACA with 40,000 DACA representatives, or DACA recipients in San Diego, that we have humane immigration law enforcement through places like, sanctuary areas like Monarch School, and to stop harassment of our residentially challenged individuals. So we're hoping for a police chief that believes in true fairness and compassion, and is open-minded and intelligent in his decision-making.
Or her.
Or hers! Thank you.
Thank you. Good job, good job. Another table. Come on up. All right, you're up.
All right, so we talked about multiple different things, including what everyone had said. A lot of the priorities were making sure that we have proper training for handling homelessness, making sure that we are not criminalizing the homelessness, making sure that they know the community resources, making sure that those resources are easy and available to them. Making sure that we're building a positive relations with the community, making sure that the new police chief goes out to marginalized communities and makes sure that there is a personal connection with them. We also want to see that we have transparency throughout this whole process, making sure that training and staffing for training. Oh, okay. So we're talking about how we need to have more training for mental health, dealing with mental health and psychiatric crises, making sure that we have a fully staffed department, making sure that we have a fully staffed PERT team, and that's about it.
I know you,
Oh, sorry.
the acronym PERT.
PERT.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not too sure. I always
Psychiatric
forget.
Emergency Response Team.
There we go.
So it's a mental health resource.
There we go.
Acronyms. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Ready?
Thank you. Hey everyone, my table's right over there. We came up with a lot. You know what? I actually want to be straight up. I'm glad that a lot of the groups that have come up have pretty much shared in the same sentiments. They share the same sentiments that we do. So addressing the disenfranchised communities, LGBT, mentally ill, non-citizens, people of color, disabled folks, and homeless. Let's not forget that. We have immigration. So we're.
Slow down.
Oh my bad.
And talk loud.
Immigration and non-cooperation and demilitarization. Those are definitely, we've been hearing these themes. So what I like is the fact that y'all just came up with the same things our table did, like that was like resonating with us right there. So thank you. Housing crisis. One thing that, the community policing, relationship building, all that definitely has been hit already. But the one thing that nobody's really talked about that to me is very personal and very dear is the marijuana industry and just the fact that in 2018, California is going recreational legal, medical, yeah, woo to that. But we don't really have a set plan and transparency in how we're regulating, how we're decriminalizing, and how we're just enforcing this new industry. So just some issues to point out. All right, thanks, Jeff. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. So, this is my table right here in the middle in the front. What we talked about was racial profiling, and I'm not really gonna talk a lot about it because, like, I don't want to say she. Can I get your gender pronouns, please?
What are your pronouns?
Yeah. Oh, like she said, a lot of you already went, so a lot of you already talked about what we talked about. So racial profiling. We also talked about restorative justice, and so what we said for that is that we'd rather change our system to a restorative system, and we want to hold each other accountable and keep our communities together. We talked about homelessness and staffing. We're kind of like understaffed, and we want to make it better. And we talked about building community trust, and we wrote underneath the response time, geographic profiling, and we didn't want the police to go kind of into immigration statuses with the community members because it's it's not like their business. But yeah, that's kind of what we talked about. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Our table came up with a list of 6 items. We want a proven track record. We want whoever we hire to have a proven track record of decreasing police violence and racial profiling. So we're assuming that this is a person who already has experience and they've already done this someplace and they're going to come here and do it even better. And so if somebody wrote in this you study on police profiling as a part of that. We want that new chief to recruit and retain diverse police force. We've talked about that. We want that person to make sure they implement accountability and discipline of police officers who may not always do the right thing. We want transparency and access to tapes and body-worn cameras. There was an article in the paper about the fact that it's very difficult for victims to ever see the body-worn camera footage, and even if it may have stuff that shows that there was negative behavior on the part of the officer, they don't get to see it, and that we need to look at that. We need to look at that policy. We need to ensure that there is a positive working relationship with diverse communities. People have talked about that, including LGBT, Black, Latino, immigrants, homeless folks. The chief needs to implement community policing, as was said earlier, even more effectively.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good. You could take it.
All right, I'm representing a table back by the cameras. The first really good idea that I think is a little different than what you may have heard before is independence from the mayor, and a specific suggestion to have an employment contract for the chief to ensure that the police chief can be accountable to the community as well as to politicians, and to have some security to disagree with leadership when necessary. Echoing some other things, increases to psychiatric emergency response and de-escalation training to decrease violence and improve outcomes with our community members. addressing racial profiling and bias within the SDPD and improving relationships with immigrants and communities of color and other marginalized communities, and to increase community policing and restorative justice.
Hello. These are some of the things that our table talked about. First of all, we discussed de-escalation of incidents because we've seen a lot of incidents where, you know, they end up being a fatal accident or a fatal incident where they kill the person, and a lot of the people in my table thought that they could deal better with these kind of incidents, and we were discussing incidents where two cops had responded to an incident at the same time, and one officer responded with a lethal, you know, form, and the other officer responded with a non-lethal type of force. And you know, what's the discrepancy there? You know, like why would somebody, you know, try to kill the person and the other one wouldn't? So we're just wondering if there could be like a better training or something like that. Another thing that's pretty relevant right now that we've seen is the homeless people that have been arrested or they've been ticketed, just to like kick them out of the areas where they're staying. And we don't think that ticketing them or arresting them is really helping them at all. So the people at my table thought that maybe they should deal with the homeless people in a better way than you know, making their lives worse. Another thing was diversity in the department and in the leadership of the department, where you know, the chiefs or the sub-chiefs could be, you know, there could be more diversity within those departments. And the use of body cameras was another thing that, you know, I had thought about also, that it's very difficult. Like the person before me mentioned that it was very difficult to obtain the video from the body camera. So maybe there could be more transparency with that. And I guess that's it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Are you ready? I see you with a piece of paper.
Is it okay if we split our explanation between us? Okay.
You go first, dear.
Hello, my name is Piper Smith. This is Ray Bell. We're going to split ours into two.
Sure.
So my primary opinion on any terms of police reform in any way, shape, or form, whether it's the police chief or the department itself, it all starts with how much the officers are getting paid. So you can't really implement any of the reforms that we're talking about here and have that be an effective reform without having good people. So a lot of the officers that are what I would describe as fantastic officers are leaving. And it's because they're getting incredibly larger amounts of money by going to other departments. It's very, very, very easy for an officer who has already been vetted, already been hired, to lateral to a totally different department that's going to pay them an extra $10,000 a year, $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, sometimes $40,000 a year more to do the exact same job, and maybe at a department that's not staffed so poorly to where their job would actually have a little bit higher quality of life. So the few officers that we have that are actually LGBT themselves are extremely taxed, extremely taxed. They are already doing an exhausting, understaffed job. And then on top of that, they're trying to do their absolute best to implement positive LGBT-related reforms in their department, and they're exhausted. They're absolutely exhausted. So that, above anything else, I believe is the highest priority, and really the feedback that a lot of the city officials here need to see and need to hear. And I would actually like to see a police chief be hired that is willing to fight for those and fight for their officers, even against the city officials if needed, to help get a really, really strong, awesome, top-of-the-line department full of great, great, great people where we're polling pulling above average individuals from other departments. Let's be the department that people want to move to get to.
So our other thing is transparency, and that's a huge, huge thing. And it starts with the whole process of getting a new chief, is making sure there's no secret panels, making sure that it's an open process, that everyone knows who's involved and how that process works. That's really important. But also transparency also comes down to accountability. Accountability is with, officers, how they treat all of our citizens, but also how accountability, how the brass at the political level, the city hall, and how they're accountable to their officers. I think that's hugely important too. And being able to also deal with the problems, and also not being, being okay with, enforcing the law and not taking some things that may not be politically correct, but making sure that we're enforcing the laws, I think is hugely important. And also the rules of engagement, and how they interact, the police interact with the citizens. But also when we go back to recruitment, I think you mentioned this a little bit, but make sure we have officers also that represent everybody in the community. I think that is huge, and that's part of transparency, that we want, a police department that looks like San Diego. So that is what we've got. Thank you.
Nicely done. Good. Are there any posters, any tables? Any more tables with a poster? Going. Okay, I didn't count everybody, so thank you for the answers to question number 1, the priorities. Those were both articulate and new information and themes that we see starting to develop. We want to shift to question number 2, an equally important question about the leader, his or herself. What are the top characteristics or qualities that the next chief of San Diego must possess? Encourage you to make your notes on your individual form, conversation. We'll bring you chart paper, and we'll do the same kind of report out again. Okay? Jump in. We're going to refocus up to the front. Yoo-hoo! You want to go first? We have one group, and then you'll be number 2. We have a group that's volunteered to go first. You'll be number 2. All right, could we have your attention back to the front? We're going to use the same process. Ask each table to bring your chart up and describe for us your conversation. So, nice.
Hello, my name is Terry Stanley. I'm a youth organizer at Mid-City Can. So for question number 2, some of the themes that our table had was, the first one was open to advice and putting into action. So we want a police chief that listens to the community and also implements what the community needs or community wants, and doesn't we'll consider it or anything like that. It's like, no, you will do it. Another thing is proven track record with diverse communities. We feel like that's very important, considering that San Diego is heavily populated with the diverse communities, and we want to make sure that the communities are safe. Another one we put is political independence. Police chief is a political kind of position, so we do have a strong mayor form, so having a police chief that knows how to work around the strong mayor form and stand up for the community when as much as possible. Another one's empathy, so police chief that understands where everybody's coming from and doesn't make assumptions or anything as that sort. And the last one is transparency and accountability. We want to have a police chief that holds their police department accountable, and also is transparent when it comes to policies that are being placed, when it comes to community forums, even the process itself of how this is being selected, and even in the future. We just want to make sure there's some part of transparency and accountability as well. So thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you. So the 3 things our group wanted were, first, record of performance, character, and independence. So looking at record of performance, we want a leader in the police department to be able to have a record of reaching out outside of police work and being able to has been involved in their communities prior. The second thing, obviously, is a dynamic leader and manager, somebody that has been able to manage people and manage obviously the brass and so forth, but have that dynamic capability to do that. And then being able to a leader that can focus on change, that can put a plan together to focus on change and really put that together. That is very, very important. Then obviously the character, having compassion, having a backbone, moral backbone, and also really being a real moral authority. That's somebody that the community can look at. Yeah, this person is really a moral authority. And then lastly, independent, being able to to be able to talk back to, or not talk back, or to manage back to the brass, and standing up for what is truly right, even if it's not politically expedient. So those are our three things that we think is most important in our next chief. So thank you.
Well done. Thank
Good evening, thank you. Just to give you an idea, this is coming from an ex-cop. Okay, I'm a retired San Diego police officer. So I found it very interesting that I needed to be here tonight to see and hear what everybody wants in our next chief. And I've been through 5, and I know what it's like. And I went through one that came from out of town, and I know what it's like. Experience, huge. We've got to have somebody that comes in knowing what to expect and what to do. They have to have been around the block more than once. They got to be approachable, someone you can go talk to. Someone you can just walk up to the office and say, Chief, can I talk to you? Come on in, let's talk. What's the problem? Here's the problem, let's discuss it. Got to have someone that will open the door and let you walk in. Somebody that the officers and the community will trust. Somebody that they've got to know, they have already known, they can trust this person. They're open, they're transparent. As difficult as it is to tell everybody everything, it would be really nice to have a chief that would be able to just open up and say, this is what it is, and I'm going to tell you the whole story. They're willing to listen. They're going to sit down and listen to everybody, regardless of what community you come from. They listen and understand where everybody's coming from. They're committed to restorative justice. And there's going to be a balanced fairness to both the officers and the community. There is an internal way of looking into it. The community and the officers both have to understand that the chief's position is to make that decision. And that chief has got to make a strong, firm decision when a choice is made.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Good evening. These are the characteristics and qualities that our table thought were important. Number 1 was respect for the public civil rights. Number 2 was there's a preference for a non-cis white male to be our next chief. Number 3, someone who is culturally competent. Number 4 was someone who is a nurturer/educator. Number 5 is someone with a demonstrated record of integrity. Next was an effective community communication is what we have. And last but not least, someone who will be accountable to the community and not politicians. Clarify number 2. So do you want a definite?
Are you saying you want a white male that's non-cis, or are you saying you want?
Oh, very good, thank you. Someone who is not a thank you for putting that. Not a white male, not a cis white male. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Another table. Very good.
Good evening. My name is Erin, and I represent the table in the back there. What we would like to see is characteristics of our next police chief would be a community officer, not a political officer, someone who is accountable, open-minded, has strong ethical values, a proven ability to do everything that's on that wall there, question 1, recognizes that diversity includes sexual orientation and gender identity, someone who is empathetic, has a positive track record of community policing, and a commitment to improving the officer's quality of life. So we talked about this being understanding work-life balance, being empowering of their officers, and recognizing their values as humans.
Very good, thank you. Great.
Sorry. Hello. So we just came up with these qualities for the next police chief that we would hope for. Somebody who is compassionate for everybody, somebody who is trustworthy and transparent, and that knows the communities that he or she are serving and the needs of those communities and the challenges of those communities, and who is in the know of Obama's 21st century policing, and somebody who is open-minded, a strong leader, and hopefully somebody who is bilingual.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Angel Alexander. I was born as a chimera twin. I am a twin. I was born hermaphrodite, female and male. So I've been discriminated a lot out there as intersex, hermaphrodite. But it's time for us to get together, work together. We need to work for the next generation, for the kids. We need to stop all these races, what's going on with white people, Mexican people, Latino. This is where we need to start giving the children, that's the one they're gonna rule the world. Right now, the old system with the new system is crashing. So we need to work all together with the kids and the police. They need to start working. And I think we need someone who specializes with unity, integrity, with all races. And we need to start giving our kids. We need to start making more festivals, like in Balboa Park. We need to come together and with the barrios and Black, Mexican, whatever. We need to start letting the children get together and play, and that's what I think.
Hi, my name is John Berman. I'm a community resident. Most of ours have been covered already, so I'm just going to talk about the ones with a little more detail that we wanted to get to. Put proven track record of non-criminalization of the homeless, but this is more of a characteristic. We want our police chief to focus on support as opposed to criminalization. Our focus was homelessness, but for many things. Transparency was covered a lot, but I read an article recently, and it talked about how one police force, they gave a different message to the community where they said, our police officers used to focus on just going home safely. Now the focus is the police officers and the community, everyone going home safely that night. And I think we want to have our police chief give messages to the community, the same messages to the community as they do to their police officers, and everyone to know about it. Experience working with diverse communities. I would like to have, our table thought it's very important to have a police chief come from a city that is similar, if not, I would vote to have San Diego, but similar to San Diego, where there are many different communities, and as someone stated earlier, that it's a minority, the focus of our city is minorities, it's not majority white. Strong leadership, willing to hold the force accountable. That goes back to the community. We want to make sure we can trust in this person. Characteristics, we felt the purple ones were really important. So good relationships with other agencies, fire, mental health, etc. I don't know all of them, but want to make sure that all these agencies in San Diego are working together for the benefit of our community. Thank you.
Good job. It's a race. Just right there. Yeah.
Evening. My name is Devante, and we represent the one in the middle tables. A few points that I want to. I'm nervous. I'm sorry. A few
We
points
love it that you're here. So take a deep breath. And we want to hear what you have to say.
A few points I want to point on that we said was accessibility to the community. Like they're out and communicating with the community about different subjects or things we want. Also, a personal connection to the citizens and wanting to protect everyone, where they feel like they need to be out there and communicating with us so we can have the best benefits. As well, acknowledge and celebrate how diverse our community is, like how amazing all of us are, because there's so much diversity here, there's no reason to hide it. And lastly, to use the juvenile system not as a place to jail people or jail youth, instead to scholar them and tell them more about how our community is.
Hi. So the first one I want to on our list is commitment to representative and full staffing. There's one member at our table who's very concerned about having enough police officers, and we definitely agree for the most part, but there's also some concern that officers aren't maybe allocated in ways that are really serving the community, maybe overly focusing on some communities or some aspects of our citizenry when they could be delegated elsewhere. So we think it's important to have a diverse officer group that's adequate to serve the community's needs, but isn't overly large to the point where it becomes feeling like a militarized community. Of course, transparency, we've heard a lot about that. And there was some concern about the selection process not being transparent enough as well. But generally about being transparent in their job and what they support and what's going on in the department. A proven track record of innovative and evidence-based and community-centered approaches to policing. We thought evidence-based was very important, as well as community-centeredness as well. Somebody who embraces change, that isn't stuck in old ways of doing things that aren't productive for our community. Accountability to communities, of course, not just to politicians. And the best candidate regardless of where they're coming from. And then a commitment to diversion programs and alternatives to incarceration.
Hi everyone, my name's Louisa. We think we're the last table over here, so a lot of what we've already discussed has been said, but a couple things we did want to highlight that were not necessarily brought up. First and foremost is passion. Police chief can't do a job just because they want to show up and clock out at the end of the day. This is something that you have to live and breathe and really work toward shared goals with the rest of your community. Another one we have is a sense of justice and judiciousness and making sure that the punishment does fit the crime, especially in marginalized communities. Also being respectful and aware of the diversity that we have. I think that's kind of preaching to the choir here. And also a sense of responsiveness and being willing to try new things and adjust to the societal realities that we are facing as the San Diego region grows and changes.
Thank you. Was she correct? Does anybody have a sheet of paper? Okay, good. One more. You know what? You have a brown thing on the back. Let's take that off so it'll be sticky. I'll hold that. You put that up there.
Okay. So I came here with some fundamental thoughts, probably not having everything that's been said I agree with, but I don't think that this one has, I'm sorry? Oh, okay. But there's one aspect that I feel is kind of unrepresented in this, and that is I'd like to see the police representing the civilian population. And when I say civilian population, I mean specifically the taxpayers, the citizens who are not in the military. After seeing what we've been seeing on TV, the flag is like lick the boot of the flag. I'm seeing flags on all of the cars. I don't really, nothing against the flag, mind you. I respect the flag, but I don't feel that there's plenty of other flags, for instance, you could have on the backs of police cars that want to badge their police cars. So maybe different communities, maybe the school kids could come up with a flag to badge the police cars that represent a local civilian community. We live in a place that people commonly say is a military town. I don't use the language. I say that there is a military presence here, something we should all be proud of. But what I'm most proud of is the idea that government is run by civilians, and I expect to see that. When I see the police and the police presence, I want to be sure that this police presence that the civilians are paying for is under a civilian government, and that they can act and conduct themselves as a civilian government. So that's why I'm wondering if we have that. And also the idea of weapons from the military-industrial complex being brought down to the police is another thing I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about that everywhere. Those things really should be for rescue down the south where we're having hurricanes, not in police departments. But I'm saying that here because...
What kind of chief? Characteristics of the chief?
I'm saying that here because this is the front line. I mean, if there's anywhere where we should take that stand, it is in a place of such a high federal representation as we have here. What I'm saying about the chief, the characteristics, I would like to see that commitment in the chief, that he realizes who he's working for, and what we need in San Diego, a civilian police force for civilians, and then commitment to perhaps work with citizen review boards. That's what up and down the state we're fighting that one. And then finally, someone else was just mentioning this. I put it in different words. Community policing as opposed to drone policing. Because where are all the police? Are they sitting somewhere looking through cameras, looking at everyone, or do they exist as being available to us when we need help? There's two different types of policing. That's what I'd like. If there was an open process, that's what I would like the chief to be talking about, what he's committed to. That's what I would want to see.
Good.
Right?
Appreciate it. Look at this one. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, is that all the papers? Bravo. Good. Thank you. We probably don't have time to go all the way through question 3, but I would like you to take a moment and write what you feel like. Question number 3 again. Is there anything else that hasn't been asked for, called forth, spoken about, that we haven't heard, that the city of San Diego should consider when selecting our next police chief? We want to make sure you have a moment to get those written down on your forms, and then we are going to draw our forum to a close. But I would like you to make notes and talk a little bit so you have an awareness of what your community members think. And then, like in 3 minutes, I will draw our community conversation to a close. So take a few minutes and answer question number 3. Thank you. Its next police chief. Please take your input forms and put them in the box on your left as we walk out the door so we can have all of your words. Please look at sandiego.gov/nextchief for summary of tonight. We are adjourned. Thank you. Good night.